Hi, welcome to this month's Tailoring of the Month. This is a series that we do to showcase common tailorings that a lot of our customers ask for when dealing with the design tools in our product. For those of you that aren't familiar, our design tools allow you to make changes to our desktop product or our handheld devices. In this case, today we're going to be focused on our desktop product, and those changes are done using our Agility Design Studio. Design Studio is what tailors any of our desktop applications. Now, if you haven't seen our grids and you're not too familiar with Agility Explorer, we have the ability to have a child grid inside of a regular grid. And what that essentially means is when you look at the main grid, we can click on a line in that grid and filter a smaller grid at the bottom of the screen that pulls information based on the line selected. So in this case, we're going to take a pretty simple production order grid, just shows header level information for some production orders, and we're going to give it the ability to click a line and then filter a child grid at the bottom of the screen that will show all the BOM items for the item in that production order that's selected in the grid above. So it's a pretty simple process, but it's something that a lot of people don't, typically get training on how to do, don't realize how to do. And it makes grids a lot more powerful because it gives you the ability, right, to have that line information pulling from a header, really in any case, regardless of what document you're looking at in SAP. So let's go ahead and get started here. I'm going to go to my desktop and I'm going to go to Design Studio. So again, that's what we're using to tailor the desktop applications. You can think of it DS for desktop. That's going to be all of our desktop stuff. And in the future, if you're looking to tailor handheld applications, that's done in FS, Form Studio. We call all of our handheld applications forms. So you would go to Form Studio for that. But today I'm going to go to DS for the desktop product, Design Studio. And anytime you're in here editing something in Design Studio, I know I talk about this in all my tailoring videos, but it's just always very important to note. You want to create your own custom project. And if you're tailoring or making changes to something that we already have in the desktop product for you, you'll want to make a copy of that grid or dashboard or whatever you're making changes to make sure that doesn't get overridden. Whenever we run the product updater, that actually updates all of these agility products, right? So if I went and added a grid in Agility Essentials DS here, that grid that I added, next time I update, it would be gone. It would be overridden and removed. So I want to make sure that I add those components in my own custom project. That way it's not touched by the updater. It's backed up, it's safe, it will never be changed or removed. It'll always be there. So I'm going to go to my own custom project here. It's the Tailoring of the Month project. And the first thing we can do here is we can take a look at this production order grid that we're going to be adding the child to just get a sense for what we're doing. So if I drill into my production orders grid here, I actually use this in a past video to showcase how to create a dashboard. I can go to my SQL statement and we can just take a look at what we're pulling. So very, very simple here. We're pulling the start date, what's the production order number, what item is it, how many are we making, and what's the date it's due. And we're filtering that based on planned and released production orders. So very simple here. We can actually simulate from inside of here and take a look at what that looks like. So if I were using this inside of Agility Explorer right now, this is what I'd see. Again, very plain, simple grid. We're going to add some bells and whistles to this and make this grid a lot more interesting. And I think when you see the after here, so remember the before, right? Very plain, just basically, hey, here's your production orders and what you're making throughout the day. You'll see how powerful the child grid is and how much more information we're able to get on this screen. So now I'm going to close out of this. And we're going to start here by creating our child grid. So our child grid is still a grid. It's still its own separate entity. So we're actually going to go to a new component and we're just going to make a new grid. We also have the ability to make a child grid that is a process grid if you wanted that child grid to have some functionality. Say, if we wanted that child grid to have a label printing functionality, we can make it a process grid and print a label for any of the components that are on that BOM, right? Something like that. But in this case, we're just going to go nice and simple with a regular grid here. I'm just going to call this BOM details. Oh, forgot my D. BOM details. And it is a good rule of thumb to add a description here to these as well. So whenever they're used inside of a regular grid, we want to note that. So I'm going to go ahead and put in here child grid for production, child grid for production order grid. So, this is called my production orders grid. So I'm just going to make a note, hey, this is the child grid for that grid. That way, if anybody ever needs to come in here and maintain this, if I'm out of the office or not working on a customer, or maybe I leave the company, something like that, somebody can quickly go in here and see the description and know, okay, this BOM details is the child grid that pulls inside of that, right? So just quick, easily available information. And the first thing, real easy here, we're going to add our SQL statement. So I actually already typed this up here in SQL Management Studio. Just going to drop this in and format. And basically what I'm looking at here is I'm going to the BOM details, and I am just taking, I'm not worried about the father item right now. We'll talk about that in a minute. I'm just looking at what do I want on the screen after I click on that line inside of the main grid. And in this case, I want the component's item code, the item name for that component, how many of it go into the father or parent item, what warehouse I'm pulling it from, what's the issue method, and what's the price of that component item. So I'm going to apply that. I'm going to hit OK here, and let's take a look at what that's actually querying. So if we preview our BOM details now, we'll see another really simple grid, but this is what's going to pull from inside of the other one. Right now this doesn't tell us much because we can't even see the father item, so we don't know what's on the same BOM together. Again, that's purposeful in the design, and it will make sense soon. But all we see here is just a bunch of component items, no idea what BOM they go to. We can see the component items, the quantity, warehouse issue method, price, right? Pretty simple. Now, the last thing we need to do to the child grid to get it to work inside the parent is we need to add a filter. Now, this can be the tricky part of linking the two grids because you really have nothing to visualize right now, right? It's not inside of the main grid yet, so it's hard to visualize, but we want to think of it this way. When we go into that main grid, what piece of information from the line that we have highlighted in the main grid do we want to filter this child grid? And in this case, we're looking at BOM details. So we want to look at, in the main grid, when you click a line for a production order, we want to look at the item code for what's going to be the finished good on that production order. And we want to use that finished good to filter, our child grid here that has BOM details, so we can see the BOM for that finished good. So in this case, I'm going to add my ITT1 father field as my filter. The father field there is just that item code of the finished good, the header item that the BOM is for. And I'm going to change this from a range criteria to just a single value. That means one value is passed into this every time. That's typically going to be the case when you use a child grid inside of a main grid, because we're clicking on a line and we just want to take one value from that line and use that to tell our child grid what to display, right? So in this case, single value, it's going to be the father item. When we click in the main grid on a line, we're going to take that item code, fill it in right here, and that's what's going to filter our child grid. So we apply that. Now this is done. Now we need to go back to our main grid to create the linkage. So our main grid's in here, it's good, it's set up. We need to go add a detail link. That's what's going to allow us to use a child grid in here, or often called a detail grid. It's going to show details, so that's another way to talk about it. We'll go to component name, and we want to go find that BOM details. BOM details right here, my created grid. So we're going to link that component. So that's the grid we're going to pull in. Then we go to linked columns and hit our lookup. In our target column of father, you see this is our filter, right? If we had no filters here, this box would just be empty, couldn't do anything. So that's why you have to have the filter first. So now we have the filter for the father field. So now we're going to look at that main grid and all the items that it pulls. And right here, our item code that's what's equivalent to the father. So basically we're saying we're going to push that item code from the main grid into the filter, and it should equal the father, and that's what's going to pull those BOM details. So we'll save that. And then lastly, I'm going to go ahead and add a heading here just so you know what we're looking at. So we'll just call that BOM details. That way, when you're inside the main grid and you see that grid at the bottom, you know really quickly, oh, that's the BOM details for the item. Makes sense? Apply, okay. And now we can go ahead and preview our main grid here. And now you see as soon as we open this up, let's go ahead and make this full screen. As soon as we open this up, you see BOM details down here, and you see my query from before, but nothing's filled in there because I don't have a line selected. So as soon as I go and select a line, we can see the details for that line's BOM. Let's grab something else, right? And we see it's changing based on the item. So here I have the same item on those two different orders. BOM's the same, right? Go to a new item. Some of these ones look like they have very similar BOMs. I do see this number changing here. And we can go through and just keep looking, but at this point you see the vision and it's completed, right? So we have this production order grid. Here's the header information, right? Okay, what's the start date? What's the orders? What item am I making? What's the planned quantity and when's it due? I see all that information. If I say, okay, I'm gonna start working on this, what's the BOM details? I go ahead and click on an item here, and I see those BOM details below, the item code, item name, how many, what warehouse I'm pulling it from, the issue method, and then lastly, the price there. So very simple. You know, this is a quick video, a very easy tailoring to understand and learn how to do, but this is something that a lot of people want to do and don't quite always realize how to do it. So now that's finished here, and we have that child grid BOM details working inside of that production order grid. And again, looks like this. You see how much more powerful that grid that just pulled all this information becomes, because now we have that BOM inside of it. And really, you know, it gives you the ability to drill down into the line of a header without having to, you know, go look at a separate grid. So I hope you got a lot out of this session today. Again, this is a very common tailoring, something a lot of people ask for if they're using a desktop product. It's very easy to do. You know, sometimes you can make this a little bit more complex, but at a high level, very easy, right? This is how you add a child grid inside of a parent grid to get more detailed information for that header item. So thank you for watching. I hope you got a lot out of this session.